Hello and welcome to this presentation, which is on nature of characters. My name is Irving Delgado, and I am here with
Alex Bortolotti.
the wonderful Alex Bortolotti and
John Stanislav.
the amazing John Stanislav. Yes, indeed. We will be talking about the transcendence of characters and the meaning of themselves being an idea. So, what do we mean by saying that the characters themselves are ideas?
The idea itself is existing by itself, and uses nothing else to express it.
The characters in Six Characters in Search of an Author represent more than their own stories. They represent ideas.
A character, sir, may always ask a man who he is, because a character is really a life of his own marked with his special characteristics, for which reason he is always somebody, but a man, I am not speaking of you now, may very well be nobody. Since the characters are the ideas, it means that they transcend beyond even normal people, which are considered here nobody.
What do we mean by the transcendence? The characters in this story cease to be owned by the author. The ideas and other personality traits that they have completely go outside the initial boundaries that the author has put in place, which means they become their own character.
Once the idea transcends the original author and permeates the imagination of other authors, it becomes its own idea.
Since the idea permeates the imagination and minds of other authors, each idea culminates into what we would like to call a Frankenstein of an idea, which will add to the crucible of its own idea that will restrict the images, the interpretations of other authors into that idea that has already been established as independent.
With this idea that a character and idea is a Frankenstein, pieces and interpretations of each author and each interpretation of the author's idea all come together to form this one unified idea that has transcended the original and become this new formed idea.
Speaking of originality, no idea has ever been original.
For example, there's a theory that everything that has ever existed, or everything as we know it, is not original on its own and has been a carbon copy of things that have existed before, as shown in this example right here, how we start with the fire, to the lantern, to the light bulb, and finally to our common era flashlight app.
How can I help it? This lady just stands there. Is she supposed to be me? Let me tell you that if anyone said hello to me in that manner and that tone of voice, I'd burst out laughing just as I actually did.
This idea again connects to the idea of other ideas being Frankensteins, basically from the event of fire to the lantern to the light bulb to the modern flashlight app. They all have the same purpose, and they all have this similar qualities, but they're ideas and different interpretations of the original idea.
So we've talked about repeatedly of the Frankenstein, but what does it really mean for the idea? It means that, as in the story of the Frankenstein itself, as we saw in the quote that we saw earlier, the girl was offended by the interpretation of the actor of her. And in the story of the Frankenstein goes in a rampage. The Frankenstein's monster goes in a rampage, and we explain it as Frankenstein has many body parts from many different people that are not his per se, until the doctor puts them together, which is the independent aspect of the idea itself. But then once something else is tried to put in that crucible of Frankenstein, it goes in a rampage or rampant because it no longer fits into said crucible.
The stepdaughter says, "But I wasn't speaking of you. Believe me, I was speaking of me. I don't see me in you. That's all. I don't know why. I guess you're just not like me."
So we see this in our lives with the many art forms we do especially. For me, my poetry comes with the sense of understanding that I can't force a character into any role that they do not already fit into. The character itself cannot be too many or too few ideas itself. It has to fit perfectly, and the character itself does restrict my own creativity. The ideas from my poetry transcend my own brain when they come out into the world and people read my poetry. When they read the poetry, they're experiencing emotion and they're already forming preconceptions of the characters that I had no understanding of. But since poetry is so open-ended, you can experience the poetry in many ways. You can interpret the characters in many different ways, too.
I believe for my art, it's a little bit more restrictive. For example, when I place my image or my idea on a canvas, on a paper, or some other medium, I'm trying to restrict the imagination of other quote-unquote authors and try to make them fit my own crucible from the image that they see. However, they're also able to create their own and have their own interpretation, and this all adds to the culmination of what we've already established as the Frankenstein.
With the idea of music, it has been consistent throughout the ages, but as artists develop and quote-unquote authors discover more ways to take the different pitches and different notes and different scales and transform them into beautiful tones, it completely changes. So while the idea of each individual note has remained the same and has been independent, it is how each musician and artist molds them to their own. For example, Mozart's Requiem is mostly a dark and sinister piece, but the maestro with the Omaha Symphony has somewhat adapted it to sound more of a celebration of Mozart's death rather than an actual funeral. The name's Bond. James Bond.
Yeah, it's Bond. James Bond.
The name's Bond. James Bond.
So we can observe this in modern media, such as Batman, 007, James Bond, Christmas music, and even Satan. Yes, Satan. So what do we mean by this? I mean, we've already shown you an example of how each interpretation of it still restricts itself to the crucible of its own Frankenstein, that it's James Bond, it's 007, he's a secret agent who's badass, who loves martinis and loves writing what is it called?
An Aston Martin.
Exactly. So the point here is these ideas are independent despite how many interpretations of them there are. For example, Batman has been played by many different actors, but the idea of him being somewhat of a ruthless hero who doesn't like to kill but still is willing to put himself in danger for the safety of others still prevails because he's an idea. He's not a character in itself, he's an idea. Same with Satan. He represents evil, he represents everything bad in the world, but he doesn't have a fixed character because he is an idea.
Again, with the Christmas music stands the time. The songs are still the same, just how they're interpreted by the artist has changed. Frank Sinatra does his version of White Christmas different than Michael Bublé does. It's all the same music, the same notes, just the rhythms and the interpretations are different. Oh, splendid. And you'll be telling me next that you in this play, that you have come to perform for me and are truer and more real than I am? There can be no doubt of that, sir.
The father in this quote is explaining to the director that you can never truly capture a perfection of an idea within a medium, whether it be an actor or a canvas or even writing. You just can't capture the perfection that is the idea that the original creator or the subsequent creators after that have dreamed up.